Americans understand fairness, and the minimum wage isn't fair.
Does the minimum wage guarantee that we have an entire class of workers locked in a controlled wage rate that does not allow free markets to work? Let's take a look. If business got together for the purpose of fixing a wage rate, they would be guilty of a conspiracy to hold down wages. But what happens when a politician sets the pay rate?
In January, when the new Congress is sworn in, I'll become chairman of the Senate Labor Committee again. My first order of business will be the Fair Minimum Wage Act, a bill that will raise the minimum wage to $7.25 an hour and give almost 15 million Americans a long overdue raise.
The wage has now been set by a politician. Politicians want you to believe that they can pass a law and create wealth. Millions of workers are now trapped in a wage rate that does not move with the free markets. The cost of labor should be determined by a free market and not by a politician. Let's take a look. Because we no longer have constitutional money backed by gold or silver, the value of the wages imposed by the politician declines over time. So what is money, and what is the responsibility the Constitution gives Congress as it pertains to money? Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution says this: Congress shall have the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof. Section 10, no state may make anything but gold or silver coin a tender in payments of debt. The power to create money belongs to Congress, and that money should be made of gold or silver. In 1913, the power was given to a privately held bank called the Federal Reserve. The Founding Fathers were much opposed to a privately held bank creating the money supply. Here is what Thomas Jefferson had to say about it.
If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and the corporations which grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered.
Inflation is a tax. When wages are locked in and can't rise with inflation, in a free market, people suffer. Take a look at our example. This is a convenience store that opened in 1971. We wanted to compare the year 1971 with the year 2012. Snickers was the best-selling candy bar in 1971 and continued to be in 2012. The largest convenience store chain in the world was selling Snickers bars for 7 cents in 1971. Snickers bars had risen due to inflation to $1.29 by 2012. The minimum wage was $1.60 in 1971. The federal minimum wage was $7.25 in 2012. A minimum wage worker could buy 22.86 Snickers bars for an hour of work in 1971. A minimum wage worker in 2012 could buy just 5.62 Snicker bars for 1 hour of work. The minimum wage has lost 75% of its buying power from 1971 to 2012. Paper money before 1972 was a certificate for either gold or silver. In 1972, President Nixon did this.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
Taking the country off its constitutionally mandated gold or silver-backed money seems like a crooked thing to do.
People have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
We can see by the numbers that a minimum wage worker in 1971 could purchase 1.83 ounces of gold for 40 hours of work. In 2012, that number had fallen to 18/100ths of an ounce. Using the gold standard, minimum wage has lost 90% of its buying power from 1971 to 2012. Without a gold standard, politicians were free to spend like madmen. inflating the money supply and placing the burden of the declining value of the dollar on working people. From 1970 to 2010, federal spending rose by 287%. Inflation from the founding of the nation until 1913 was unheard of, as the price of gold stayed at a constant $18.93. FDR ordered all gold coins and certificates in denominations of more than $100 turned in for other money. It was now illegal for Americans to own gold. In 1934, FDR raised the price of gold to $35, effectively increasing the gold on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet by 69%, allowing the Federal Reserve to inflate the money supply.
Our dollar is now altogether too much influenced by the internal policies of other nations. Therefore, the United States must take firmly in its own hands the control of the gold value of our dollar. And as a further effective means to that end, I am going to establish a government market for gold in the United States. Therefore, under the clearly defined authority of existing law, I am authorizing the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to buy or sell gold at prices to be determined from time to time after consultation with the Secretary of the Treasury and the President.
The price of gold in 1913 was $18.92. The average price of gold in 2011 was $1,571.52. The dollar has lost 98% of its buying power since 1913.
A family with 2 kids that earns the minimum wage still lives below the poverty line. That's wrong. That's why since the last time this Congress raised the minimum wage, 19 states have chosen to bump theirs even higher. Tonight, let's declare that in the wealthiest nation on earth, no one who works full-time should have to live in poverty, and raise the federal minimum wage to $9 an hour. We should be able to get that done.
In conclusion, is the minimum wage a price-fixing scheme? To have the same buying power today as $1.60 was in 1971, the minimum wage would have to be $71.89 per hour. End the Federal Reserve, return sound money, and end the minimum wage. Let free markets work.
Americans understand fairness, and the minimum wage isn't fair.
If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and the corporations which grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered.